Did you know that one of the most famous lines in movie history was never actually said the way most people think? Millions of people quote it wrong every single year. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is one of those rare films that feels alive, like it breathes, sweats, and bleeds right in front of you. It tells the story of greed, survival, and what gold can do to a human soul. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Number 20. The famous quote, "Everyone gets wrong." Here is something that will surprise you. Almost everyone who has ever quoted this film gets the line wrong. The line people say is, "Badges? We don't need no stinking badges." But if you go back and actually watch the movie, that is not what the bandit says. Not even close. The real line from the film is much longer and far more interesting. The bandit leader, a character full of swagger and menace, actually says, "Badges? We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges." It feels different when you hear it the right way, doesn't it? There is a pause in it. There is attitude in it. There is a whole personality wrapped inside those words. But somewhere along the way, people started shortening it, trimming it, polishing it down to something snappier. By the time it traveled through decades of pop culture, through comedy sketches, through parody films like Blazing Saddles, through cartoons and television shows, the original line had completely transformed. Most people today have never even seen the original version. They only know the copy of a copy of a copy. The actor who delivered the line was Alfonso Bedoya, a Mexican actor who brought such wild, unpredictable energy to the role that audiences were genuinely unsettled by him. He was not playing a villain from a comic book. He was playing something that felt real and dangerous. Director John Huston later said that Bedoya's delivery was so raw and spontaneous that it caught even the crew off guard during filming. Nobody expected it to land the way it did. Nobody predicted it would become one of the most quoted moments in cinema history. And the funny part, the quote people love most is not even the real quote. What people remember was never quite what happened. Number 19. A father and son make history together. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre holds a very special place in Hollywood history, and it has nothing to do with gold or bandits. It has everything to do with family. Director John Huston and his father Walter Huston both won Academy Awards for the same film in the same year. John won for Best Director and Best Screenplay. Walter won for Best Supporting Actor. Think about that for a moment. A father and his son standing on the same stage, holding the same golden statuette, celebrated by the same audience for the same movie. It had never happened before in the history of the Academy Awards, and it has never happened again since. There is something deeply moving about that. John Huston had cast his own father in the role of Howard, the wise old prospector who seems to understand something about gold and greed that the younger men simply cannot see yet. Walter Huston had been a celebrated stage actor for decades. He was experienced, respected, and brilliant. But many people felt that this role, dusty, physical, joyful, and philosophical all at once, was the greatest work of his career. John later said in interviews that casting his father was both the easiest and the most personal decision he ever made. He knew exactly what his father could do. He trusted him completely. And Walter delivered something extraordinary. He danced, he laughed, he philosophized under desert stars. He made an old man seem wise and strange and beautiful all at once. When Walter Huston won that Oscar, his son had written the very words that won it for him. That bond between a director and his actor, between a son and his father, gave the film something no budget could ever buy. One night changed both of their legacies forever. Number 18. Humphrey Bogart, Against Himself. Humphrey Bogart was one of the biggest movie stars in the world when he made this film. He had already starred in Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. Audiences loved him, they trusted him, they rooted for him. And John Huston used all of that goodwill against the audience in the most brilliant way possible. Bogart's character, Fred C. Dobbs, starts the film as a sympathetic man, broke, desperate, down on his luck, wandering the streets of Tampico, Mexico, begging for spare change. You feel sorry for him immediately. You want things to work out for him. But as the gold starts coming in, something shifts. Dobbs begins to change. Slowly at first, a suspicious glance here, a selfish thought there, then faster and faster until he becomes someone almost unrecognizable. He becomes cruel, paranoid, and violent. He is no longer the underdog you rooted for. He is the thing you fear. Bogart later said this was the role he was most proud of in his entire career, and it is easy to understand why. Playing someone audiences are meant to distrust required him to strip away everything people loved about him. He had to become unlikable on purpose. That takes courage for a star who depended on public affection. There were moments during production where Bogart genuinely surprised people on set with how dark and unnerving his performance became. Some of his fellow cast members said there were scenes where they were not entirely sure where the character ended, and Bogart's own intensity began. He was not performing danger. He was channeling something real and uncomfortable from somewhere deep inside. What looked like acting was something far stranger and more personal. Number 17. Filming in the real Mexican desert. Most Hollywood studios in the 1940s preferred to stay close to home. The backlots of Burbank and Culver City could create almost anything. Jungles, deserts, mountain ranges, all fake, all controllable, all safe. John Huston did not want safe. He wanted real. He packed up his entire production and traveled deep into Mexico, shooting on location in places that had barely been touched by cameras before. The crew filmed in the streets of Tampico and in the rugged mountains near the town of San Jose Purua in the state of Michoacan. The heat was intense, the terrain was difficult. The logistics of moving equipment through remote mountain paths were exhausting and sometimes dangerous. Crew members dealt with illness, insect bites, and extreme temperatures. The actors had to navigate real rocky ground, drink from real streams, and endure conditions that were as punishing as anything their characters faced on screen. But that suffering gave the film something magical. The dust on Bogart's face was real dust. The sweat soaking through his shirt was real sweat. The exhaustion in everyone's eyes was genuine and earned. The mountains did not look like mountains. They were mountains. The sky above them was the actual Mexican sky, not a painted backdrop. John Huston believed that audiences could feel the difference between real and fake, even if they could not explain how. He believed that the land itself would become a character in the film, indifferent, harsh, and beautiful. He was right. Every frame shot on those real locations carries a weight and texture that no studio set could reproduce. What the audience felt watching it, the crew had already lived. Number 16. The book that started. Everything before there was a film, there was a book. And before there was a book, there was a mystery. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre was written by a man who called himself B. Traven. That pen name, B. Traven, is one of the great literary mysteries of the 20th century. Nobody knew who he really was. Nobody could find him. He refused all interviews. He sent no photographs. He gave no speeches. His novels were published and celebrated. But the man behind them remained completely invisible. When John Huston acquired the rights to adapt the book and traveled to Mexico to begin production, he tried to meet B. Traven in person. A man eventually appeared on set, introducing himself as Hal Croves, claiming to be merely Traven's representative and translator. But many people on the production suspected that Hal Croves was actually B. Traven himself, hiding in plain sight, watching his story become a movie while pretending to be someone else. John Huston himself later said he believed the two men were one and the same. There was something surreal about the whole situation. The story being filmed was about men consumed by greed and obsessed with hidden treasure. And the man who wrote that story seemed to be hiding his own identity like a treasure buried deep underground. Even today, historians and literary detectives are not entirely certain who B. Traven really was. Some believe he was a German anarchist, some believe he was an American fugitive. The truth has never fully surfaced. The man who wrote about hidden gold kept himself hidden to the very end. Number 15. Walter Huston's unforgettable dance. There is a scene in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre that stops people in their tracks every single time. It is not an action scene. It is not a confrontation. It is a dance. When the three prospectors finally strike gold, when they realize that months of brutal labor have actually paid off, Old Howard, played by Walter Huston, breaks into a spontaneous, joyful, strange little jig. He kicks up his heels. He laughs out loud. He seems almost drunk with happiness, bouncing around the rocky ground like a man who has forgotten his age entirely. It is one of the most purely joyful moments in classic Hollywood cinema. And here is the remarkable part, and that dance was not in the script. John Huston had not planned it. He had not choreographed it. He had not even requested it. Walter Huston simply felt the moment and moved. He improvised the entire thing right there in the desert heat, in a single take, with the cameras already rolling. John Huston later said that when he saw his father start dancing, he made a silent decision not to call cut, not to interrupt, not to redirect, not to do anything except let the camera keep running and trust that what he was witnessing was something he could never have written or planned. That instinct was correct. The dance became one of the most remembered and beloved moments in the film. It made audiences smile even as the story around it grew darker. It was the last pure breath of happiness before everything began to fall apart. Not rehearsed, not planned, just real. Number 14. The Gila Monster. That wasn't acting movies in the 1940s frequently used animal wranglers and trained creatures to create the illusion of danger without actual risk. But on the set of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, at least one moment of on-screen peril was not manufactured at all. During production in the Mexican wilderness, the cast and crew encountered a real Gila monster, one of the only venomous lizards native to North America. The creature was large, slow-moving, and deeply unsettling to look at. The Gila monster has a reputation for being stubborn and difficult to dislodge once it decides to stay somewhere. It carries venom in its lower jaw and is known for its tenacious grip. When it appeared on location, it caused a genuine disruption to the filming schedule. Some accounts suggest that Bogart himself had an uncomfortably close encounter with the animal, though the exact details vary depending on who is telling the story. What is consistent across multiple accounts is the very real sense of unease that the creature created on set. Not performed unease, not camera tricks, but the authentic, skin-crawling discomfort that comes from being physically near something dangerous in a remote place, far from medical help. The animal eventually moved on, as wild things do, but it left behind a strange energy that seemed to seep into that day's footage. The desert in this film feels alive and threatening in a way that is hard to define. Some of that feeling came from the landscape itself pushing back. Real danger has a way of showing up on film, whether it was invited or not. Number 13. John Huston's cameo and what it means. Directors often hide themselves in their own films. A quick background appearance, a brief nod to the audience that says, "I was here too." Alfred Hitchcock was famous for this. John Huston did the same thing in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and his cameo is one of the most thematically loaded in Hollywood history. Huston appears near the very beginning of the film as a wealthy American tourist dressed in white linen. He is standing on the street in Tampico when Bogart's character, Dobbs, approaches him and begs for money. The man in white gives him money, not once, but twice. The third time Dobbs approaches him, the man turns and confronts him directly, making it clear that this well has run dry. Now think about that. The director of the film, the man controlling every shot, every performance, every creative decision, appears in his own movie as the person who gives the main character the money that begins his entire journey. Without that gift, Dobbs has nothing. Without that moment, there is no story. John Huston is literally the hand that sets the plot in motion. Some film scholars have argued this was intentional, that Huston was making a comment about the relationship between a filmmaker and his characters. He gives them life, he gives them resources, and eventually he watches them destroy themselves with what he has given them. Whether or not that was the intention, the image lingers. The man in white walks away, and everything that follows is his doing. Number 12. Bogart refused a stunt double. By the time Humphrey Bogart made this film, he was a major Hollywood star with significant leverage over how his productions were run. Studios expected their top-tier talent to use stunt doubles for anything physically demanding. It was practical, it was safe, and it protected the studio's financial investment in the actor. Bogart often ignored this expectation entirely. During the filming of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Bogart performed a significant number of his own physically demanding scenes without a double. He scrambled over real rocks. He trudged through real desert terrain. He endured the same punishing location conditions as everyone else on the crew. There is one particular sequence where Dobbs becomes increasingly unhinged and paranoid, stumbling through the wilderness alone, driven mad by suspicion and greed. Bogart's physical performance in those scenes carries a rawness and an exhaustion that feels impossible to fake. Because for the most part, it was not faked. He was tired. He was hot. He was in a difficult environment with limited comfort. And all of that reality translated directly onto the screen and into his performance. John Huston encouraged this approach. He believed that physical reality grounded the actor in something true, and that the camera picked up on authenticity in ways that could never be manufactured in a studio. Bogart's willingness to suffer alongside his character gave Dobbs an authenticity that elevated the entire film. No soft chair, no comfortable trailer could have produced those scenes. Comfort would have ruined them. Number 11. The bandits were real. Local people. Hollywood productions have a long tradition of hiring local extras to fill out crowd scenes and background action. On The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, John Huston took this tradition and pushed it further than most directors would dare. Many of the Mexican bandits seen throughout the film were not professional actors. They were not even experienced extras. They were local people, farmers, laborers, villagers, who lived in and around the areas where the film was being shot. Alfonso Bedoya, who played the memorably menacing bandit leader, was a working Mexican actor with professional experience. But many of the men surrounding him in those scenes had never stood in front of a movie camera before. They brought something to those scenes that could not have come from casting a professional. A rawness and unpredictability, a physical authenticity that made the bandit sequences feel genuinely threatening. These were real men of the land, wearing clothes that looked like their own clothes, carrying themselves with a naturalness that acting school cannot teach. John Huston worked with them through translators and used a great deal of physical demonstration. Showing rather than explaining, miming rather than instructing. Some of the best spontaneous moments in those sequences came from men who did not fully understand exactly what was expected of them and simply responded to the situation in front of them. The result was scenes that pulse with life. The threat feels unscripted because, in many ways, it was. Real people doing unfamiliar things create a specific kind of energy that real actors sometimes work their entire careers to reproduce. Number 10. Max Steiner's score. Was almost not used music tells an audience how to feel. A great film score can transform a good scene into an unforgettable one. Max Steiner was one of the most celebrated composers in Hollywood history. The man behind the scores for Gone with the Wind and Casablanca, among dozens of other celebrated films. He was hired to compose the score for The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and what he created was powerful, dramatic, and richly layered. But during editing, there were serious conversations about how much music the film actually needed. John Huston was a believer in silence. He felt that certain scenes in the film were stronger without musical underscoring, that the absence of music created its own kind of tension, its own kind of dread. There were long debates between Huston and the studio about where music should appear, how loud it should be, and whether certain scenes should carry no score at all. The film that eventually reached audiences represented a compromise between Huston's instinct for silence and Steiner's instinct for orchestral grandeur. Some of the most powerful moments in the film, long stretches in the desert, quiet conversations under the night sky, carry very little music. The silence makes the mountains feel bigger and the men feel smaller. Steiner's score, when it does arrive, hits harder because of those quiet spaces around it. The restraint was a creative battle, not a natural agreement. What reached the audience's ears was the product of argument, compromise, and difficult decisions. Even the silence was fought for. Number 9. The film was based on real gold rush history. The story of the treasure of the Sierra Madre feels timeless because it is rooted in something timeless: human greed. But the specific setting of the film connects to very real historical events. The Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico were genuine locations of gold and silver discovery during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Prospectors, many of them American, many of them desperate, did indeed flood into these remote and dangerous regions, chasing rumors of unimaginable wealth. The conditions they faced were every bit as brutal as the film suggests. Wild animals, hostile terrain, extreme temperatures, water scarcity, and the ever-present danger of bandits and local conflicts made prospecting in these mountains extraordinarily dangerous. Many men went in and never came out. Traven's novel drew on this real history, weaving together documented accounts and folk stories about what gold hunger did to men when they were isolated from civilization and community. The psychological deterioration of Dobbs in the film is not a fantasy. It mirrors patterns of behavior documented in historical accounts of real prospectors who became so consumed by paranoia about their claims being stolen that they turned violently against their own partners. Greed is not a modern invention. The mountains had seen it all before. When John Huston chose to film in real Mexican locations rather than studio backlots, he was in a sense returning the story to the very ground that had originally inspired it. The mountains remembered everything. The cameras just helped other people see what the mountains already knew. Number 8. The film was a box office disappointment at first. This is a fact that surprises almost everyone. The treasure of the Sierra Madre is today considered one of the greatest American films ever made. It regularly appears near the top of best films lists. It is studied in film schools. It is celebrated by critics and filmmakers around the world. But when it first opened in January of 1948, audiences were not entirely sure what to make of it. The film made money. It was not a disaster, but it significantly underperformed relative to what Warner Brothers had expected from a Humphrey Bogart picture. There were several reasons for this. Audiences in 1948 were accustomed to Bogart playing heroes, men who were tough but fundamentally good, men who did the right thing when it counted. Watching Bogart turn into a paranoid, violent, selfish man was uncomfortable for people who loved him. They had come to see their hero and instead found themselves watching a cautionary tale about moral collapse. Some audiences left the theater feeling unsettled rather than satisfied. Critics, however, were far more enthusiastic. Many immediately recognized the film as something special and important. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences agreed, rewarding it with 3 Oscar wins. Over the following decades, as cinema culture matured and audiences became more comfortable with complex, morally ambiguous storytelling, the film grew steadily in reputation. What confused people in 1948 became what they most admired 40 years later. Time did not change the film. It changed the audience. Number 7. John Huston's wild personal life. mirrored the story art, and life are rarely completely separate, and in the case of John Huston, the distance between them was smaller than most people realized. Huston was a man of enormous appetites for adventure, for hunting, for gambling, for risk of every kind. He was reckless with money, reckless with relationships, and reckless with his own physical safety. He had worked as a boxer in his youth. He had been a cavalry officer in Mexico. He had hunted big game in Africa. He lived the kind of life that most people only read about in novels. When he was making The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, a film about men who chase wealth into the wilderness and destroy themselves in the process, he was simultaneously living a version of that story in his own way. He was spending money he did not always have. He was pursuing experiences that others would have considered too dangerous. His relationships were complicated and frequently turbulent. Some of the people who worked closely with Huston during this period have suggested that he felt a very personal connection to the themes of the film, not because he identified with Dobbs's greed, but because he understood the hunger, the compulsion to chase something, to risk everything, to go further than reason would allow. That was something Huston knew from the inside. The director was not outside the story looking in. In many ways, he was living a version of it. That closeness gave the film a truth that technique alone could never produce. Number 6. Alfonso Bedoya never learned English for the role. Alfonso Bedoya, the Mexican actor who delivered one of the most quoted lines in movie history, did so with a very limited understanding of English. His first language was Spanish. When he delivered his dialogue in the film, including the famous badge speech, he had learned the lines phonetically, understanding the emotional intention behind the words even when he did not fully understand their literal meaning. This is remarkable when you consider how effective his performance is. Every pause, every emphasis, every wild grin and threatening gesture lands with perfect timing. You believe every word he says because he commits to it so completely. Bedoya worked closely with the production's translators and with John Huston himself to understand the context and emotion of each scene. He was told not what the words meant in a dictionary sense, but what they felt like, what his character was thinking and feeling in each moment. That emotional truth came through even when the language was foreign to him. In a strange way, the slight imprecision in his English delivery, the accent, the phrasing, made the character feel more real, more threatening, and more memorably strange than a perfectly polished performance might have. Bedoya received significant acclaim for the role and worked steadily in American and Mexican productions afterward, but nothing he did afterward quite matched the cultural impact of that single scene. He delivered immortal words he barely understood in a language that was not his own, and somehow, impossibly, he got it exactly right. Number 5. The gold dust ending was John Huston's favorite shot. Every great film has a moment that its director holds closest to their heart, a single image or scene that captures everything the film was trying to say. For John Huston, that moment was the ending of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Without giving away every detail for those who have not yet seen the film, the climax involves gold dust, the literal product of months of brutal, life-destroying labor, being scattered by the wind across the desert. It is gone. All of it. gone back to the earth that it came from, as if nothing had ever happened, as if no one had suffered, as if the whole desperate adventure had been a dream. Huston later said in interviews that he considered this the single most satisfying image he ever put on film. It worked on so many levels simultaneously. It was visually beautiful, a swirling golden cloud dancing in the mountain wind. It was thematically perfect, nature casually reclaiming what men had fought and died for. It was deeply ironic, the punchline to a dark joke that the universe was telling. And it was emotionally devastating. All that suffering reduced to a moment of almost serene indifference. The earth did not care what it had cost. The wind did not care what it meant. The gold simply returned to the ground, and the mountains remained exactly as they had been before any of it started. Huston said it was the kind of ending that could only come from a story that was absolutely honest. It was not a happy ending. It was a true one. Number 4. The film changed. How Hollywood portrayed Mexico. Hollywood films of the 1930s and early 1940s frequently portrayed Mexico and Mexican characters in ways that were deeply stereotyped. Lazy villagers, comic sidekicks, or one-dimensional bandits whose only purpose was to provide an obstacle for the American hero. The treasure of the Sierra Madre did something genuinely different, and this deserves to be recognized. While the bandit characters in the film are certainly threatening and dangerous, the film's portrayal of Mexican life and culture is far more layered and respectful than what had come before. The village sequences, particularly the remarkable scene where the villagers celebrate after Howard saves a young boy's life, show Mexican community life with warmth, dignity, and genuine humanity. These are not comic caricatures, they are people with rich traditions, deep bonds, and real emotional lives. John Huston made a conscious effort to portray the Mexican locations and their inhabitants with authenticity and respect. He hired Mexican actors for significant roles. He filmed real communities and real landscapes. He allowed Mexican characters to have wisdom, warmth, and complexity that American films rarely granted them at that time. Howard, the wise old prospector played by Walter Huston, ultimately finds his peace not in gold, but in the gratitude of a Mexican village. The Americans destroy themselves. The Mexican community endures. That was not an accident. Huston was making a point. For a Hollywood film of 1948, that was a genuinely bold and progressive choice. Number 3. Huston wrote the script in record time. John Huston was many things: adventurer, hunter, gambler, painter. But he was also a genuinely gifted writer, and he wrote the screenplay adaptation of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre with remarkable speed. While exact timelines vary in different accounts, what is clear is that Huston approached the adaptation with intense focus and completed it far more quickly than most screenwriters of his era would have managed with material of similar complexity. The novel by B. Traven is rich, philosophical, and densely written. Adapting it for the screen required not just condensing events, but capturing an entire worldview, a particular vision of what gold does to men and what men do to themselves. Huston later said that he felt the story's central idea was so clear and so powerful that the adaptation almost wrote itself. He was not trying to impose his own vision onto Traven's material. He was trying to serve it as faithfully as possible. He stripped away elements that would not translate to screen. He compressed timelines. He found the visual equivalent of ideas that Traven had expressed in prose. What emerged was a screenplay that felt at once faithful to its source and completely cinematic in its own right. It was one of the first times that Huston received an Academy Award nomination for writing, and his Oscar win for Best Adapted Screenplay that year confirmed what those close to him already knew: that his gifts were not limited to the director's chair. He understood story from the ground up. Every word he wrote, he heard spoken aloud in his head first. Number 2. The film predicted the modern anti-hero. In 1948, the idea of a Hollywood film built around a protagonist who is genuinely flawed, genuinely selfish, and ultimately destroyed by his own worst impulses was radical. Film noir had been pushing in this direction, but even the darkest noirs typically gave their heroes some redeeming quality, some final act of nobility that let the audience leave the theater feeling that goodness had been present somewhere in the story. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre offers no such comfort. Fred C. Dobbs does not redeem himself. He does not have a last-minute change of heart. He does not sacrifice himself for someone he loves. He falls apart. He becomes cruel. He becomes dangerous. And the universe disposes of him with almost casual indifference, not as punishment, but simply as consequence. This was astonishing for its time. Modern audiences who grew up with films like Chinatown or television series built entirely around complex anti-heroes may not fully appreciate how bold this was in the context of 1948 popular cinema. But filmmakers and writers who came after Huston absolutely recognized it. Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and countless others have cited this film as a direct influence, not just on specific creative choices, but on their fundamental understanding of what stories could do and who they could be about. The idea that a film could follow a man's deterioration with clear eyes and refuse to rescue him, that was new. That was brave. And it changed what movies were allowed to say about human nature. Huston opened a door in 1948 that filmmakers are still walking through today. Number 1. The film was nearly banned before it was released. This is the fact that most people have never heard, and it belongs at the very top of the list. Before The Treasure of the Sierra Madre ever reached a single movie theater, it faced a serious and potentially fatal challenge. Not from audiences, not from critics, but from the studio system itself and from the political climate of post-war America. The film's content raised serious flags during the internal review process. A story about Americans who go to a foreign country, are consumed by greed, treat each other with suspicion and violence, and ultimately achieve nothing. This was not the kind of story that certain powerful voices in the film industry or in American culture wanted to see on screen in 1948. The country was emerging from World War II with a sense of pride and optimism. A film that suggested American men could be greedy, paranoid, murderous, and ultimately pathetic was deeply uncomfortable for some of the gatekeepers of the time. There were also concerns about the portrayal of Mexico, specifically about whether the bandit sequences might cause diplomatic friction or offense. Warner Brothers had to navigate several rounds of internal notes and adjustments to bring the film to release. John Huston fought hard to protect the integrity of his vision throughout this process. He argued passionately that the story's darkness was not anti-American. It was universal. Greed was not an American problem. It was a human problem. He won most of his battles. The film reached theaters with its essential honesty intact. It nearly did not make it. And the world of cinema is immeasurably richer because it did. Bonus fact, the lost sequence. That changed the film's heart. There is one story about the making of the treasure of the Sierra Madre that most fans have never heard, and it lives in that quiet space between what was filmed and what was shown. During production, John Huston shot additional scenes that developed the early friendship between the three prospectors, Dobbs, Curtin, and Howard, more fully than what appears in the final film. These scenes took time. They breathed. They let the audience settle into the warmth of the men's early camaraderie before the gold began pulling them apart. Huston believed deeply that the audience needed to feel the genuine bond between these three men before watching it dissolve. The devastation of the film's second half, he argued, only works if the audience has truly come to care about who these people were before greed entered the picture. During editing, however, the studio pushed hard for a tighter running time. Films in the 1940s were generally expected to move quickly, and long character-building sequences in the early acts were considered risky. Audiences might lose patience before the story picked up momentum. Huston was forced to make cuts. Some of the quieter, warmer scenes between the three men were shortened or removed entirely. What remained was more efficient. But something was lost, a tenderness in the early acts that would have made the later betrayals even more heartbreaking. The film as we know it is extraordinary, but those who have read about the production and the editing process sometimes wonder what the longer, softer version might have felt like. What would it have meant to spend more time with these men when they were still good? What would their fall have cost the audience if the friendship had been shown more fully before it was destroyed? The cut scenes never resurfaced, but the emotional gap they left behind is something sensitive viewers sometimes feel without being able to name it. A strange absence where warmth should have been, old choices, lasting shadows. The treasure of the Sierra Madre is not really about gold. It never was. It is about what happens inside a person when they let their worst impulses take over. It is about the difference between what we need and what we think we want. It is about friendship and how fragile it can be when fear gets inside it. It is about the land, ancient, indifferent, beautiful, that outlasts every human drama played out on its surface. What John Huston gave the world in 1948 was a film that told an uncomfortable truth without flinching, that asked difficult questions without pretending to have easy answers, and that trusted the audience enough to let them sit with a dark and honest ending. Humphrey Bogart, Walter Huston, Tim Holt, Alfonso Bedoya. These performers gave everything they had to a story that deserved everything they could give. The mountains held their stories, the desert kept their secrets, and the camera captured it all with an honesty that still feels rare and remarkable more than 70 years later. If you enjoy these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them, one story at a time.